It is a space for us to learn about why solidarity with Palestinians is so important as a matter of human rights and social justice, and not a space for normalizing inequality. We hope to increase international solidarity and sympathy with all oppressed people. May it serve us to grow as a playback theatre community, as artists and as world citizens. We are grateful for the support of Fidaa Playback Theatre Lebanon and all playback groups and panelists that have come on board to join us in speaking truth to power. So to say a little bit, before I hand it over to the panelists, that playback theatre is 46 years young, and in a way, it's starting to perhaps have a little bit of a midlife crisis. So, playback theatre is practiced in different ways across the world, and many people focus on the lighter side of playback theatre, where we come together to use playback theatre for celebrations, for birthdays, for weddings, for I suppose. And for different sort of open performances. And that's really wonderful. But also there are other people around the world that are or have been also using playback theatre to address social injustices in the context that they are from, and really working deeply in the practice of developing playback theatre and, the arts, and in terms of how can you do that? How can you address injustices through playback theatre? And our exceptional panelists that we have here today have a lot to share about that. So we really look forward to hearing from them and their experiences in terms of using playback theatre and the arts as a form of resistance and a tool for social justice. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. So Jo Salas is the co-founder of Playback Theatre and the founder of Hudson River Playback Theatre, a social justice orientated company that's been active since 1990. She teaches playback theatre internationally, including in the West Bank in 2012 and 2013. Jo's publications on playback theatre include numerous articles, a TED Talk, Everyone Has a Story, and 3 books, Improvising Real Life, Personal Story in Playback Theatre, which is now published in 11 languages, Do My Story, Sing My Song, Music Therapy in Playback Theatre with Troubled Children, and the recent Personal Stories in Public Spaces, Essays on Playback Theatre by its founders, co-authored with Jonathan Fox. And I really do recommend, if you don't have a copy of that book, that you do order it. Fidaa Ataya is a storyteller. She has founded and co-founded a number of groups, including Art and Activism Residency, Hakaya Group to revive traditional Palestinian storytelling, Arabic School of Playback Theatre, Women's Theatre at Burj Al-Barajna Refugee Camp, the Rain Singer Theatre at Tulkarm Refugee Camp, and the Palestinian American Children's Theatre. She is a drama and education specialist and faculty member at the Arab School of Playback Theatre, a member of ITC4 in New York, a fellow at Georgetown University, at Performing Art and Politics, as well as a puppeteer, filmmaker, and director. Faisal Abu Haija is an actor and comedian from Jenin refugee camp in Palestine. A graduate of theatre He graduated from the National School of Humor in Austria and has covered in refugee camps during Showtime, Frontline, and performed with celebrated British comedian Mark Thomas. Faisal was
to be here. I have attended several events in the festival, and it has been wonderful and heart moving and mind inspiring. So I'm really honored, as I said, to be part of it in this way. And it's very nice to see Fidaa and Faisal again. We met years ago in the West Bank, and Fidaa, I'm wearing the bracelet that you gave me. So yes, this first question, how do I see my work in playback, particularly in the American context, as a tool for justice and resistance? And as you said, my group, which has been going for more than 30 years, we do have a strong social justice orientation, and that has led us to work with a number of topics and populations, focusing on justice issues, including empowering school children to stand up to bullying, which is really like a training in citizenship, having the courage to stand up when you see something that is unfair or wrong. We've done shows on violence against women. We've done several shows on human rights, commemorating the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. The climate crisis, which is very much an issue of inequity and injustice, and a number of other topics. When I think about resistance, then I sort of wonder, like, can we call, I mean, we don't live in the same kind of oppressed context that people in the West, in Palestine do, or people in many other places where playback groups are using playback to resist, like in Hong Kong or Cuba or Ukraine or Afghanistan. You know, we live in what's on the whole a democratic society. I actually looked up the definition of resistance, and it said the first meaning was the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. And the second meaning, which I think is supposed to refer to physical, bodily resistance, like resistance to a cold or something, it said the inherent ability of an organism to resist harmful influences. And to me, that works metaphorically as well as literally. So in the US, it is basically a free democratic society. However, there are many groups within that society that do experience silencing and oppression, and particularly people who are brown or black. Their voices are not heard. Our Hudson River's vision, our sort of stated official vision, is a society where every voice is heard, every story honored. So we are committed to offering playback where we can to those voices that have been silenced. We did also, during the Trump administration, we started to experience, it's definitely the threat of violent authoritarianism. And we offered our playback shows as a place that people could tell their stories of fear and disgust and determination and vision and solidarity. So that was a very direct experience of what it might feel like to be resisting our own oppression. My group is mostly white, not all, but we're all privileged people. I mean, I won't say that we don't experience oppression, but I won't compare it to the kind of oppression in these politically very asymmetrical situations, like Palestine. But what comes up for me most, and Kathy, let me know when I'm running out of time. Am I okay?
Yeah, you've got about a minute or so.
Okay.
I'll keep
Thank you.
you on track.
Yeah. So what comes up for me most is the project that we did with groups of immigrants in our community. We once they're here, they still experience discrimination and poverty and isolation. And so we offered we offered shows to them, and they said, yes, we want to tell our stories. We want our stories to be out there. And they told stories about crossing the desert and crossing the river. They talked about how impossible life in their own countries was. They talked about how sad it was to have to leave their families. They talked about how successful their children were now in their education and so on. And often the children were present, like hearing these stories, perhaps for the first time. So we did more than 100 of these performances. Very memorable, very moving. They were all bilingual. We had bilingual actors and an interpreter. And it really was we were like witnesses to resistance. We offered playback to people who were very bravely resisting both the oppression in their own country and the oppression that they now experienced as immigrants. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Jo, for that. And as you know, when you were speaking, I was just thinking about what you raise about this idea of playback theatre as resistance in these kind of connected to these big kind of global these kind of national conflicts, but also what playback theatre's resistance looks like in other countries, and kind of on the different levels of playback of resistance. And you really kind of spoke to that clearly. Thank you. Faisal, would you like to take up the baton?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, it's not easy to speak after Jo, like after this experience and incredible titles. So before I start, I would like to thank you all for organizing this event, and for all the people who joining. Just the idea of people joining in different timing, kind of it has something like refreshing the heart. So thank you all. Yeah, actually, when we talk about resistance, especially from a Palestinian, when a Palestinian talk about resistance, in Palestine, everything it's attached to resistance in a way, in the indirect way or not direct way. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes I feel it's too much. So was my experience with the playback theater, especially when we do it in Palestine and when we tour in West Bank, and especially in Area C, which there's areas controlled by the Israeli military army. So, and suddenly to come to this community and to say, hey guys, we have a show, while there is like checkpoints and soldiers like down the street, it's kind of, it was not easy for us as an artist. Like, I'm seeing all of this, suddenly I will come to this community and say, hey guys, we are a performer and we want to hear your story. But after we done a couple of times, I found out like that, how much playback theater was encouraging for people to talk, to tell their stories. It's not easy for somebody who's face difficulties to talk about it, especially for artists or for theater people. And because in Palestine, we have so many, like all of these NGOs working and all of this idea of foreigner who comes to help or to volunteer or whatever they do, that's a create kind of a political speeches all the time with people. So when people they come to speak, it will not be personal stories. It will be speeches about Palestine, which is good and great, but was that challenging how we want to address different resistance, let's say, with personal stories, with personal life stories, and we want these stories to be heard, because the battle in Palestine, it's battle of stories. So I just would like to add an example about this, how this connected to the resistance, about a village called Tuwani. Tuwani, it's a tiny village in South Hebron Hills in Palestine. So Tuwani is surrounded by Israeli colonies, and they have like not access to many things, like even they cannot build a road there sometimes, and there's so many challenges, and every time you have to cross the community, you have to go through many checkpoints. So, and behind Tuwan exactly, there is like a military zone for the Israeli soldier to practice. As one of these stories was, like we went there to do a playback theater show, and then I got the story. I was the conductor for the show during that time. And then we got the story from a child. He said, I have a story for you guys. And he jumped, very brave. And he started to, so the story is about summer camp. So they decide to do in this community a summer camp, which is basically like, you know, like to play, to have fun. It was a school holidays. And the summer camp place exactly in a mountain that face a colony called Khafat Ma'un. So one of the idea of the children, like they want to make the mountain look beautiful. So they bring hundreds of used tires and paint them with Palestinian flags, like you know, red, white, black, green, to make it beautiful. So when they have a break, one of the Israeli settlers came and took one of these tires and got back to the colony, which is like just like 5-minute walk. But you know, when we say Israeli colony, it's mean like security, soldiers, guns, cameras everywhere. And the children saw this. Suddenly, this group of children, they organize a demonstration and they start to marching towards the colony, chanting, "We want the tire, we want the tire." And then it's create like really a problem, because that's basically for the Israeli army, that's attack. Like there is attacks, then more police comes, then more soldiers comes. The interesting was for me as an artist to take this story was how these children, like spontaneously, they act as like, you know, they act like heroes suddenly, and they were so brave to go and face and chant, "We want the tire." Their families in the village, which was like 15-20 minutes away from them a bit, so they hear that, they don't know what's going on, so they start to all shout, supporting the children, "We want the tire," but they don't know what tire they talk about. So suddenly this community, it's turned on about you know, we want to get our tire back. And it was big negotiation between the army and these children. Like it took all day to get the tire back. And first they give them different tire, like without the color on it. And the children refused. So finally, I want to make the long story short, they got it back. Then another demonstration, like on the way back to the village, to Tuwani, shouting, "We got the tire back, we got the tire back." So this story, you will not find it in the media, and you will not find it in anywhere else, or what any people talk about Palestine, whatever, especially politician. So that is for me a very strong example about what is resistant mean, how it came very pure from these children. And when we play this story in front of the audience, everybody, like suddenly after the show, stood up and they start just to shout, "We want the tire back." So that was like I think the power of the Playback Theatre, how to create a space for people to share their story and feeling safe about it. And they got feel like proud of it and show how much there is courage on it. And there is like very strong characters behind it. And the heroes, they are all 13, 12 years old, like 14 years old. So that was for us as a theater people, that was a resource to make a play about this. Then we took this story and we make it like the whole production, and we tour with this play around the West Bank. Every time we do a show like in Bethlehem or Jenin or Nablus or Ramallah, when we reach to the scene of the tire, the audience starts shouting too. Like really, we are not planning it. It was kind of a inspiring moment for us to watch that every time there is something about this tire, I don't know what, but because it's like coming from the heart of these children, it's reached the people. I think that is, for me, that is the resistance we want. We want to keep the Palestinian story alive, especially with this Israeli big propaganda about what is Palestine and what is going on there. And everybody like kind of frame you somehow, like you are a victim or a terrorist. But you know, and you have these stories, it's helped to break this stereotype of who we are. I think I still got more time. I go over time. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Faisal. It's okay. It's okay. Do you want to just say kind of the last kind of thing of what
just the last thing, like exactly that's like resistant is very connected to expression, and Playback Theatre was a good tool to help people express what they want to express, whatever. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. And I think that, you know, that story that you shared about the, you know,
just last thing, so now you can put the link on the comment.
Yes, Hani, if you could
for
just
people
share
to know about this community and what they are doing and some scenes of our play.
Fabulous. So Hani will just drop that link into the chat for people. And I mean, it's such an extraordinary example of I suppose extraordinary on many levels, but also how, you know, children become politicized so early on, but also just in terms of how important it is that, you know, to have that space to tell stories that are not full of jargon and kind of from, you know, kind of political authorities, but what it is to live in such a situation and actually have that space created to tell your experiences of resistance in everyday life and the nuances in that, that it's not just black and white. So thank you for that. Fidaa.
Hi, Kathy. Shukran, Faisal. I will continue your speech, مش مشكلة. So since
please do, Fidaa. Yes, please do continue my speech.
I'm really honored to be part of this panel. I'm thankful to everyone in the world are watching us now and be in solidarity with our Palestine. Since Palestine is like now. So back to your question of Playback Theatre or art as tool of resistance, and back to my little tiny experience in Palestine as Palestinian who is living in the West Bank of Palestine, where we go from place to another is our life itself. Our daily life is to wake up in the morning and just wash your face is resistance. So anything you do as a person who's living in this heart of the world, let's say, not even heart of Palestine, heart of the world, Palestine, you could see like the big amount of violence, and which is gonna just see it through like shooting, arresting, demolishing, and so showing like settler violence now that's extending more and more soldiers, and even it's like checkpoint colonies. Just as a person who's living in this situation, you just like have to decide. Either you just stop your life, end your life by isolating yourself in a little tiny room between walls, do nothing, react nothing, and feel nothing, or try to be like a tiny human being who just can feel and say no, not being bystander, say no. I think Palestinians in Palestine with everyday life, they're saying no for this occupation, colonizations, by walking, by dancing, singing, drawing, and even acting, which is incredible. It's, for me, I live from this amazing. My family, friends, colleague, populations, Palestine, everywhere. We live from each other, breathe, work, and stories. As Faisal started with Joe by co-funding this amazing tool, and we are very lucky to have it in Palestine. And I am also lucky that I worked with Ben River and Faisal through that Freedom Bus, where we did like tour, like where we did Playback Theatre, as Faisal mentioned, in such areas like Area C, which is under military law, where all the stories is tough, all the stories is hard, all the stories is full of violence. You are as an actor on stage, you just look like this and you say, oh my goodness. And Faisal and me or anyone who will be acting just will say, oh my God, this person who he will choose me to be him. And I will show the story of the soldiers when they came and demolished his house. Oh my God. And you feel the amount of responsibility as an actor on stage, playing back this person, this character, is just with your feeling, with your heart, with amazing actors all over around you, supporting each other to just make the image deeply enough for him to heal and to breathe out after this. So during our experience in Palestine, we could see like really Playback Theatre succeeded in making Palestinians who live in such hard situations, like hidden somewhere here and there, in the front lines, facing this colonization, to speak up through the Playback Theatre. We can see them heroes on stage by playing back their stories, as we allow them to think and reflect when they see the play of their story and see, oh my God, reflect on their own life. And then through this, the other members of audience around, they could just really learn something new from each other. And here we are in solidarity of each other. We are, through this Playback Theatre, just like hugging this community, and with audience, we just love be in solidarity. This atmosphere that Playback Theatre could create in such locations, as Faisal mentions, like South Hebron Hills, Jordan Valley, and even like, let's say, Jabal Al-Risan, which is like this mountain where the colonizers came and just colonized it like 2018. And that was, I will tell about this performance later on in the next like question. But I mean, this is like incredible. This is incredible. This is how we say no. We say no through Playback Theatre. This is a strong tool. All people, all audience, storytellers, they said, oh my goodness. Oh my God. Shukran ktir. Thank you so much. Which is Amjad, I say thank you so much for you, Joe. Thank you so much for everyone who's doing Playback Theatre all over the world. I don't know how you do it, but it's the tool itself. It's the tool where we all unite together under one beautiful, warm umbrella. So it's like, you are resisting the things as an artist, and you are resisting the things as a person and as a team, as a playback group, or it's like you do this, I do that, personally for myself and for others. Because if I can't stand up for myself, I can't stand up for others. So this is, for me, art, and being a storyteller is like why I'm Palestinian. But because I'm Palestinian, I'm a storyteller. Otherwise, I'm not. Maybe I can't exist of being a storyteller. So because of this, we need more and more storytellers to be all storytellers. This is good story, this is bad story. This is kids' story, is important more than any. We are saying no to authority. That means we are not believing even journalists. That's cool. So it's about really radical tool, radical tool for formal news. Just
totally, Fidaa, and it is completely radical. And I think that we can come together in solidarity in Playback Theatre. That you are with not just yourself as a storyteller, you are with many storytellers, and just the power of the atmosphere that creates through the art form. So thank you for speaking to that so clearly. So the next question, and I'm going to ask you perhaps, Faisal, if you can kick us off with this one. And if you can speak a little bit about sharing an example of a playback theatre performance or training, or another sort of performance that you might have been part of, which was particularly successful as a form of art as resistance, and why, and the impact that it's made. And I know you've shared actually an example already, but I don't know perhaps if you have another something else up your sleeve that you would like to share.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, examples. I didn't know there's so many examples, but when you come to talk about it, then they appear
on the spot.
I think there is just to be like a bit fair, like, not always it will work. Like also it's good to bring us to the reality. Like sometimes we did the playback theater shows where it's like we feel we are not connected to the audience good enough. We didn't get the story, like. So I think that itself, that was a process of learning for me as an artist to know the audience more, to be connected, to learn how to be connected to their emotions and their feelings and what they want to say. And really, it's big responsibility. Once we did the playback theater show through, it was online. It was for a kids' school in Gaza. Like it was organized, like we have the place in Ramallah, and it was like, they prepared the cameras, the screen, it was organizing, and then we decided, and it was for us, we were very nervous, like you are performing for Gaza children, playback theater. Oh my God, what they will tell us. Are they going to tell us about the tunnel? How they will do that? How we will perform that? Are they going to say, like about the rockets, about the home demolition, how we will do it? It was really a big risk. And it was a small audience. They were like 10 little kids. And we were ready on the stage, and suddenly, like, we are ready for the tough stories. And suddenly, like, most of the stories, they were like super cute about the daily life in school. Like sometimes, especially journalists, when they come to Palestine, they always want the dramatic story, which is like, to be a headline, to be like something else. But they forget the human part. It's important also, and it's part of the resistance. So suddenly their girls starting to share about how they jealous from each other when somebody got like a high grade in the school, or she become like a good student. And I think for that child, like nobody was asking her this question about, like, to talk about her daily life in the school. You know, everybody want to hear about what's going on around Gaza, about, you know, Hamas and the Israelis attack and this happening and this happening. I think this example was for me also a new level of understanding, like what the playback theater can do and how I can, as an artist, to accept these stories too, and to bring them again to the stage. So, and really, like, they didn't mention anything about the war in Gaza or what's happening. And that was for me just shocking. And I know these kids face so much, like most of them have no homes, like but they didn't talk about it. They think it's more, I don't know, just my feeling, maybe it's not right, but they think it's like they give priorities for their daily life in the classroom to be shared and to be heard for people, because that is what is important for them. And the thing is about the playback theater, like, it's give the audience the space and the authority to choose what is priority for them. Because, you know, interviews in Palestine so much, and I'm sure every Palestinian, not only artist, has interview with the media or with the, I don't know, whatever, but always these, like, you know, everybody looking for a trend, which is, I understand how journalist idea work, but I think, yeah, that's a Gaza show, which was online, and we were only 2 actors with 1 musician. We expected like we'll do only 1 hour. We spend like around 2 hours and a half. They didn't want to stop to sharing stories about, you know, how they wake up, what's the relation to the teachers in the school. And they were really smart. They were, because the teachers, they were there also, they were passing messages through the teachers about something they want to change in the school, how they behave to them. So suddenly, and you know, because there's cameras, nobody can stop them, so they can say what they want. Suddenly I felt, oh my God, that's the playback theater tool is helping these kids to create a small change in the school is enough. Yeah.
Thank you, Faisal. And yeah, just how, you know, children just having a chance to tell their stories in their way. And those, you know, those little stories that are actually just so enormous. And that they are
last thing, just
kids
really
in any other context.
Sorry, just like last thing, really, it's my favorite always when there is children audience for a playback theater. Like, you got something blow the minds, always.
Always will teach you something, that's for sure. Thank you, Faisal. Fidaa, do you want to pick up from Faisal?
I love that game, picking up and juggling as we are having that rhythm, like, let's do it. So I'll add and continue and take you to a journey of playback theater performances, stories, experiences, which can just for kids, for old people, for specific group, we invite them for specific performances. So it's like last week performance, we invited like a group of like Palestinians who just live their life finally, and they think they are like anyone, but they are crazy. They had a crazy experience as Palestinians in their houses with their private stories, and which is like, they feel like sometimes they don't want to be like lighted, but we invited them. They were like 15. And that many stories came out with this performance. And for example, amazing women who sadly, like, her family just like from 1948, I mean, refugees who unfortunately left Palestine, like forced like to leave Palestine from 1948 to Jordan, and some of her family members, like her brothers, left to become refugees in Lebanon. And with that, she told us that story of like her journey going from Jordan to Lebanon to see her brothers. And in Lebanon, she arrived there in 1982, where she just like has to go from place to another, from Al-Rawsha to a Burj Al-Barajna refugee camp. And in the way, where she just like has a really tragedy stories with all kind of crazy things in the bus, in the like taxis, and how people thought that she has gone, and she just like all become afraid from here, and she just like with all of this, she just stand up for herself to continue that journey because she wanna see her brothers since long time she did not see them, until she arrived them and she saw them. And with the Playback Theatre Ramallah, we really excuse us, Joe, because we really developing like a specific forms. It's like for example, this type of story we played like we call folktale, fairy tale as a form, where we merge like folktale story, fairy tale with a real story all together on stage, where because we are lucky to have professional storyteller as an actor with us also, and she come up with a folktale, and the actors join her with a real story, you know, integrating that real story with fairy tale. And to be honest, this form always make my hair jump, because which is make just the story more, you know, it's like root the story back, as sometimes we don't know why we do this in our life, why we wanna just be in danger and go and visit our brothers. We could have just stayed home and wait, that time will come and bring them to us, you know, this type of things. Like it's gonna just make us this story made her heal another story. And this women who have been like during the first intifada, I did not really highlight the audience to say, speak us about your first intifada or second intifada. No, that was, what do you mean by being Palestinians? What the question was, what does that mean? What difference makes that you are Palestinian? Which type of life you're living, you know? And that other women start sharing us like another story of like how they, during the first intifada, created a women collaborative all together, and they started inventing and producing the trees all over and exporting the trees, like they exporting a lot of stories all over. And this is, which is amazing, incredible stories, which is like Hello. Another performance was in Nazareth. In Nazareth, like in a very old location, we stand all as playbackers with incredible audience come from Nazareth, and we invited them like old people to tell us stories about Nazareth. What is Nazareth? You know, and the stories come out is about very personal, as Faisal mentioned, very personal, because this is how amazing Playback Theatre works, with it just exactly on the edge of personal stories. Another training I want to tell about a training I just did this like with teenagers. Both training were really interesting. For sure, the first training was with Ben River in South Hebron Hills, which was marking in my life, by the way. But I will not tell about this one. I will tell about that one that was in Bilain village, and that was with teenagers who's really hiddenly are involved with crazy things, crazy life. It's just like crazy ideas. When I say crazies, that means they put themselves under danger and they don't think that's really danger. And they were on stage doing the playback of other kids at the school. So, for example, that's maybe Joe would say, oh my God, this is a huge responsibility. Yes, it was a huge responsibility that for them to give them like just only 3 forms, learn three forms through 3 months to be ready and perform it back using these forms to other kids. And the kids, how they were really feeling free and fine to tell that story in that school, as Faisal mentioned, the school stories is just incredible, with that feeling like, with that anything, so they are their colleague, they are students at the school, you know, it's just like they felt like fine, and their stories just like were about, for sure, about freedom and be free and be in the village and say no. They are all boys. Can you imagine that boys' stories always just like having all that energy? Another performance was with
Fidaa, I'm going to ask if you can keep it short.
Yeah. I'll keep it short, ending with a performance was in Jabal Arisan mountain. It's like in the heart of Palestine, between the three villages, Ras Karkar, Kharbata bin Harith, and Kafr Nama, where this was colonized 2018. And when through the Forbidden Life Festival, we went there as a group theater, Playback Theatre group, and we performed the stories under the stars with like crazy condition, with surround you like settlers, surround you all those soldiers, and your audience sitting with you, and you are nervous, your audience is nervous. Maybe we ask ourselves why we do that. Khalas, go home. And I will stop here. I will not continue the story. Maybe the story will continue with the third question.
Thank you, Fidaa, for keeping that cliffhanger for us and taking us for that, through that, also that extraordinary journey of just, the incredible, variety of ways that Playback has created a space for women in Palestine, for teenagers, the way that you've been innovating forms to kind of address the kind of and play back the extreme violence that people are experiencing in everyday life. Joe.
Okay. Shall I just jump in?
Jump in.
Okay. Of course, I'm on the edge of my seat, wanting to hear the rest of Fidaa's story, and I think I might have been there. I was at one of those performances under the stars by firelight that was unforgettable, and I remember you were there, Fidaa. Anyway, yes. So I'm just it's so inspiring to hear both of you speaking, and it brings up many thoughts and memories for me. And I just want to comment that I was very struck by, Faisal, what you said about the Gaza children wanting to speak about their normal lives, their not normal, but their daily lives, and how those stories, when those stories are told by people who are under oppression, those are stories of resistance without a question. They are, they're saying, we are here, we are living, we are occupied with our learning. It's absolutely, we don't have to be hearing stories of great drama for those stories to be stories of resistance. And I was also struck, Fidaa, by what you said about how when people tell these stories, particularly stories of hardship, that the process of playback allows them to think and reflect and breathe and heal and learn from each other. And that's for me, very much resonates with what I experienced, what I observed with the immigrant stories. I want to come back to that immigrant stories project to respond to this question, because I saw that happening, that kind of, often the stories were very sad, even traumatic, and there were a lot of tears, people cried. But one woman said during a performance, "It makes us sad to remember, but happy to see it." And we can understand what she meant by that. So when I think of those, performances that we did, and perhaps we'll continue. We've done one recently, but most of this project was a while ago. We really could, feel, see, and hear the impact of the stories on the teller, on the audience. And sometimes the audiences were all immigrants. Sometimes there were immigrants and non-immigrants. For example, if we did a performance in a school and the parents of immigrant children were invited, this was, for not during school time, but in the evening. So the parents of immigrants were invited, but of course the school had to invite the parents of the non-immigrant parents as well. And generally the people who came, the non-immigrants who came, had some positive interest. I mean, there are many people in the States who are very, very racist toward immigrants, Latin American immigrants particularly, but there are many others who are interested and supportive, but they don't know very much and they've never talked to an immigrant. So they come kind of out of curiosity, but it's a generally kind of, sympathetic curiosity. And in those performances where there were immigrants and non-immigrants, we would invite everyone to participate at the beginning, like when we asked questions for the short forms for warm-up, how's your day, that kind of thing. Anyone could respond, but then when we got to at a certain point, we would say to the audience, if you're not an immigrant, we want you just to listen now. We're not inviting your stories now, we're inviting immigrant stories, and we want you just to listen. So they listened, and then at the end, we would invite them to respond. What was it like for you to hear these stories? And I was thinking of course, there are many wonderful moments that I remember, but I wanted to tell you about one that came to me about that was told by a young woman from Mexico who told us about how she had to make this difficult decision.
تاخد هيدا القرار الصعب بالمغادرة.
People here sometimes say, why don't they just apply for a visa, and come legally? But it can take 25 years to get a visa, or you might never get one from Mexico. 25 years. Meanwhile, your children have no possibility of a decent life. So that's why people come illegally without a visa. So she felt she had to come to survive. And she had a little baby. She came by herself, and when she came to the river, the big river that divides United States from Mexico, it was dark, and the river was so deep that she had to wade through. The water was up to here. She had to hold her baby on her head as she crossed the river. So it was a very dramatic story, and at the end we heard several stories, and at the end, when I invited the other parents in the room to respond, one woman, white mother, stood up and she was almost in tears, and she said, I have a baby too. I have a little baby, and I just can't imagine what it would be like to have to try to save your life and save your baby's life like that, to have to do it. And she said, I've never really understood what it's like for immigrants coming here. And she said, I have so much respect. So my feeling is that this woman will not forget that story. The white people who witnessed these stories will not forget those stories. And so when they read or hear in the media these very distorted, racist stories, they will be able to say to themselves, no, I've heard an immigrant telling her story. This is not true. I've heard what is true. Maybe not all of them, but I feel like in that way, the stories that we tell in our little playback shows are sort of amplified. They ripple out, and they, in some way, contribute to justice, you know, to change. I just wanted to quote to you, sometimes the participants in these performances would write comments to us afterwards, and I want to read you a couple of those comments. So I was just talking about the impact on the non-immigrants who witnessed the stories, but also the impact on the participants themselves. So one person said, "When I participated as a member of the audience for the first time, it was very moving because you realize that you are not the only person going through this situation, and you hear other people all with different stories." Someone else said, "When I told a story, I felt for the first time that someone saw what I lived in that moment. I couldn't explain it in English, but in the end, they're aware of the injustice that had happened to me and at other times to other people as well." Another person wrote, "It's very good what you're doing because it helps us to know that someone listens to us, even though we sometimes tell our stories with pain." And one more, someone said, "In 20 years that I've been here, this is the first time I've talked in front of people." So I think I will leave it there. I'm sure I'm just about out of time, but let's continue.
Thank you, Jo. We're going to the last question. I think, Fidaa, you haven't had a chance. You haven't started off first yet, have you? No. So I'm going to ask you to perhaps respond to this last question first, and that is, any thoughts, insights about the limitations that you feel are important to consider when thinking about playback theatre or art as an act of resistance and justice?
Okay, because sometimes I don't understand questions and I really try to connect things together. I'll back to my story, by the way, and I hope I will respond the question. I will answer that question. So back to the story, and I think I assume really I would be responding that for you. So imagine yourself in your house, okay? And someone just entered and asked you to leave the house, okay? Under gun, okay? Okay, I'll leave the house. You leave the house because you don't want to die. And you just run to neighbors. And neighbors are similar, they have similar issue. And you just have no houses to hold you. Then you run to trees, to nature. And you stand under tree, you know, in order to exist and to live and to let the earth hug you, you know. And then there, you are a refugee, yeah? You just from your house and you become refugee maybe under a tree. We're just not logic. Okay. So what you want to tell us? I don't know what I want to tell you, but imagine that circumstances. And it's your land. You have the paper for it. You took it from your ancestors, grandfathers, and this land old thousands of years ago. And you know that you belong to this land and you have this formal, legal, everything's papers, and you have everything's. And they can't come and they want to kick you off from your under tree, not from your house this time, from your trees, from your piece of land, not from your house, you know, formal house. then you have to decide. You want to just again repeat the history and be again refugee, or you want to stand up? But this time you're standing up in a different way, by playback theater, by art. How is that? How is that? I'll tell you how is that. If I am alone, existing in the mountain, I'm not existing for sure. But I am there with that theater group, with that audience, and with that trees, with the mountain itself, with the sky and earth. We all holding each other, facing and say no to these colonizers, occupiers, soldiers from their way of want to erase us again and want to kick us again. We say no. Okay, it's really stressful. It's stressful, but this is how we create memories for ourselves. This is how we exist. And this is how we document our stories in our own land. Otherwise, that land will disappear maybe next year, maybe next month. Who knows? Faisal was going to Tulkarm Hills. Now we can't reach some specific point. We did reach it like 2 years ago. Myself, 2 months ago, I was reaching a point. Now I can't reach it because that military law where Palestinians can't reach everyday life, they like squeeze lands, like squeeze and disappear. So you can't live your normal life. You use this playback theater and art in general as a universal tool to say no and to support yourself and to exist, you know. خلاص. What we want more than that? خلاص. We don't want more than that.
Thank you, Fidaa. And what I hear also when you're saying, sharing what you're sharing, it's like the limitation is the context around you. It's not you doing, playback theater as a way of keeping, hope alive and keeping that resistance and that ability to live fully, by being together on land that is literally being stolen from you. Yeah, so Faisal.
Yeah, actually, I don't know, I want to jump to the, also there is one of the thoughts about the playback theater, was also challenging to take the idea of your mind that you are not here to help. It's very important, I believe, for playback theater actors or people who are doing it, especially in Palestine, sometimes when we stuck with the idea that we want to help the community to express, we want to help because, we are Palestinian and we got excited and also there is adrenaline around you. But sometimes this could stop you of listening to people, stop you of being more creative in how to transfer the stories, because the stories is already here, the audience already know what's the story about. So when somebody tell it. So it was really interesting, for me to think, when you come and you want to help, you want to give a space, you want to do this, all of kind good things, but this also could stop you of reaching audiences. Some people, even if they tell you hard story or tough story, they don't want to feel they are in a special case. And they have that's how, from my experience, I might be wrong in this, but many times I notice, when we take the story as it is and the story, and that's need a lot of skills of listening and not only the words. When we ask about who got the story in the audience, not everybody will raise a hand and say I have a story. There are so many people, they wait for the eye contact with the conductor who taking the stories, just to give him a wink or something. I want to share the story. So this idea of helping people also, it could be work, in the opposite direction. So regarding to the question, it's been before, I think it's very important, we are not helping, we are just doing a playback theater show. And sometimes it will work and sometimes it will not work. I think we got more connection to the audience, and also it's helped the audience to know more about each other. Like really, just if I have a time, I want to share last story. Like when we had a show in a village called Nabi Saleh. Maybe Fidaa was there, I think. Like this village, it's in south of Ramallah. So the show was in the night, in the middle of the village. So when we are starting the show, suddenly there is a guy from the village who just got released from the Israeli prison after like spending there 7 months. So usually the Palestinian, when somebody got out from the prison, like they want to celebrate, like it's a kind of a party to welcome him back. But exactly he come in the middle of the Playback Theatre show. So all the audience, they left the show to welcome him. You know, there is a lot of cars like peeping around, everybody with the flags, and everybody left. Like spontaneously, I have to run to reach him before the audience reaching him. Just I want to tell him, please, we have a show, you have to come to the show. If you don't come, we are like, the show is done, nobody will be there. And he was really, he was so nice guy, and he understand, and he come, and he share, and you know, not everybody knows why he got arrested, what happened with him in this 7 months. So I asked him, okay, tell us about this 7 months. And then it's become, the Playback Theatre is turned into from a performance or a helping tool or a artistic tool or a resistant tool to a way that that guy sharing his experience in Israeli prison to his community through Playback Theatre. So just was this, I hope I'm clear enough that it's not always about the idea of helping. Sometimes just we need people to know information about each other, and it's enough, and this will work. Yeah.
Totally. Thank you, Faisal. And yeah, I'm completely with you, you know, on that. You know, if we kind of get stuck in a particular mindset about, you know, the tension of what we want, it can backfire on us in a playback performance. And there's so much learning in that, to create that open space and to kind of flow with that. Thank you. Joe, as our last, yeah, you're going to have the final word, and then we're going to open it up for some questions from the audience.
Yeah, so we're talking about the thinking about playback theatre and art, the limitations, or the right, or the power and the limitations. Yeah, Faisal, I was reminded with that story of an experience that we had here with fairly recently with a man who was very well known in the community, a businessman who was, during the Trump administration, he was picked up and imprisoned and no one knew whether he would get out, and he did finally get out thanks to a lot of community support. I mean, he technically did not have a visa, but he had lived in the United States since he was 8 or 9 years old. Anyway, it was when we did our show, he told his story in the same way to our very local community. He runs a restaurant, lots of people knew him, and it was the same thing. It was both very moving and sad, you know, what had happened to him, but having a chance to tell his very close, immediate community about it was a way of welcoming him back, celebrating him. So with this question, couple of things. Faisal, again, earlier you mentioned, you know, what can playback do when, you know, you're facing soldiers and guns and checkpoints and we have our little theatre, you know, what can we possibly offer? But we know that it is essential to offer art alongside. I mean, of course, we need to be doing other kinds of political action, but it's incomplete without art, you know, without having playback or other forms, storytelling, other forms of art that appeal to the imagination to be able to imagine something different. You know, nothing, we cannot move towards a vision if there is no vision. And art, you know, playback and other forms of art can be an opportunity to see how things could be different or perhaps were different in the past. So our artistry, our imagination, our humor, sometimes all of these things are an essential part of resistance and an essential part of the movement toward justice, even though, yes, you cannot directly confront soldiers with stories, or maybe you can, but in fact, I remember a show when I was in the West Bank the first time. Faisal, you were conducting in Al-Walajah. Do you remember? I mean, you've done so many shows there, and the soldiers came.
Yeah.
They were 50 yards away, you know, with their guns, and there were 40 internationals there, with led by this woman who was a former deputy head of the European Parliament, I think.
Luisa Morgantini.
Yes. So Luisa Montini. Say her name again.
I'm terrible with the pronunciation, but I think it's
Luisa
Morgantini, right. So the woman who was hosting said, please, everybody, please, international people, do not leave, because if you leave, the soldiers will come to us. And of course, everyone stayed. Was very, very tense, very dramatic, outside in this really beautiful place. Anyway, I wanted to say that so that our art can reach people and animate people in ways that nothing else can, and it's complementary to other kinds of political action. So you need art and you need other action. We need both. We need to be able to embody stories, the most tragic and traumatic of stories, in order to make possible vision and hope. But of course, we also need to be doing the other kinds of action as well, talking to politicians, marching in the street, depending on where we are and what's safe and possible to do. We, in Hudson River's performances, particularly where it's relevant, we partner with other organizations that can provide immediate opportunities to take that kind of action, political action. So as soon as they go home. Another, it's not exactly a limitation, but it's kind of a requirement, I think, when we're doing this kind of work, particularly with groups that are not our own groups. So, you know, if you're Palestinians working with Palestinians, it's not so necessary. But like for us working with immigrants or with racism in the United States, it's essential for us playbackers to self-educate, to educate ourselves as individuals and as groups about the social, historical, political context of the stories that we're hearing, so that we're not listening in a kind of naive or ignorant way. So it's not a limitation, but it's part of the job, you know, that we have to involve ourselves in that kind of ongoing, never-ending education. And then the last thing I want to mention is, which is a limit you could think of as a limitation, is who hears these stories. So, you know, in many situations, the perpetrators of oppression are not hearing the stories. They're not coming to the shows. It can take, I mean, South Africa eventually, with tremendous political will, you had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the perpetrators did hear the stories, but very often it's very difficult to get to that step. But meanwhile, those who are experiencing the oppression are hearing each other's stories. They're building connection, they're building solidarity and resilience. And then there are witnesses to the stories, like those parents in the shows that I mentioned, the white parents, who witness the stories, and they're changed by the stories. And they can amplify those stories by telling them to more people. So eventually we are shifting the direction of the society indirectly through these stories. And it's a little bit like, it reminds me of another resistance movement in the United States called Occupy. I don't know how many people outside the United States heard about this, but this was Occupy Wall Street. So for months, there was a huge group of people in New York City and other cities as well, saying to the banks, basically saying to the money people, you can't go on doing what you're doing and exploiting the rest of us. And at those gatherings, we were not allowed, I attended a couple of times, people were not allowed to use microphones. So people would give speeches and they would say something like, they would say, we are gathered here in front of the banks of Wall Street. And then the people behind them would turn around and they would say, we are gathered here in front of the banks of Wall Street. And then the people behind them would turn around and repeat it. And so that the message would go back, repeated, so that everyone, no matter how big the group was, and somebody's just saying here, there were sister Occupy movements all over, including Australia. Right, great. So we called it, for some reason it was called a mic check. And so instead of a mic, you had human voices repeating everything that was important so that everyone there could hear it. And I think of our shows, our playback shows devoted to justice and resistance are a little bit like that. Only the people who are there hear it. But then we retell those stories. We retell, here we are online, retelling some of these stories, and there's no limit to how many people can hear them.
Definitely. Thank you, Jo. Those echoes, those stories, they become echoes, and really, really powerful echoes. And I hope that, all of what you've shared is going to, it's going to echo deeply with many of us, after this evening and, the 3 weeks of this festival has been incredibly powerful to witness and to listen to. We have very little time for questions, so but I do want to ask a question or two to you guys, and I think maybe the best way to do this is, because we don't have a chance to kind of respond, to get a response from all of you. So if you kind of feel like that the question really kind of shouts at you, then just jump in there and unmute and respond. So there is one from Warren Neebe who says, I'm curious about how our Palestinian colleagues mediate stories of resistance. Sorry, I'm struggling to scroll here. Of resistance, protest, and the traumatic reality of the oppressor's violent responses. How do you dance in, through, and around the trauma of resistance?
I think it's not always dancing. Sometimes we collapse. Like, it's not always, I don't know. That's a big question, actually, like to describe it. But I will say it, like, I'll try to make it simple. Like, you got no choice. Like, there's a reality in front of you, and this reality is tough. And you know it's tough. And people around you know it's tough. So, or you just take it as tough and you stuck in some place where you cannot do anything, where you are just afraid of everything, where you cannot move on in anything in your life, or you try to dance with it. Sometimes you will make it, but with the time, I think like you will manage to build the strength that you need to keep going. And I think the power of art, and in general, and especially the Playback Theatre, when you see the achievement you do with these very simple shows, that's also motivating you. That's helping you as a performer, not only as like you go to the community and you want to light some issues in that community. Like these achievement of art, like theater, like filming or dancing or writing, when you start to see the achievement and the effects that you do, that's helped me a lot to keep going and to believe in what I do, and which is not easy. And sometimes I got super disappointed and I don't want to do it again. But then I do it, and then I say, this is the last time. I'm not coming back. I left so many playback theater shows. I always had this drama and fight with River. I'm not conducting this. I'm not doing this. But next time I will back and I will do it. So, and that's it. I don't know if I covered the question.
Thank you for that response, Faisal. Another question from Antonio Gonzalez is, Faisal said we should not focus on help, but sorry guys, I'm having trouble here. When I scroll, it jumps. But how can we as playback comrades from abroad contribute to make justice to Palestinian people, especially as collectives, as groups, in our case, from European countries?
So Joe mentioned mentioned that how we can echoing the stories. As Rumi mentioned that, saying that words and sounds existing forever, stayed in life, even the person die. Stories can stay. Unfortunately, we're losing land disappearing. The only things can unite us, and the only things can just make us alive is the story. As much as you can, tell our story of our right of living, of being, of existing as Palestinians, because we are Palestinians. We are not West Bank, we are Palestinians. Palestinians existing since more than 10,000 old, like years old. Habibini, we exist. I want to add on the dance things. Dance is a technique, has nothing to do in life if you did not add a story there. If you don't cover that technique with the story, real story, a story full of like emotions, full of actions, full of life. You use this technique to show the story. If you only dance for dance, I don't think it's something amazing. And then I'll add, I'm sorry, Kathy, I'll add to that. If you play back a story talking about Palestinians under occupation, you do create policies. You are a politician. More than that, you are facing this power by playbacking this. You are maybe powerful with this. So it's really, as I feel always, like performing arts and politics, they are together working like this. It's not like this, or it's not like this. It's really like this. because life is about performance.
Can I just jump in with one other thought about that for people in European and countries and also North American countries? There's this very powerful and insidious movement to claim that any criticism of Zionism is anti-Semitic, and it's a way to silence criticism. It's a way to stop BDS. And one thing I think that we can all do is stand up to that. And this is outside of Playback. This is just as citizens that we can stand up to our legislators and say, criticizing Zionism is not anti-Semitic, and we have a right to do that, and you can't silence us.
So thank you.
Sorry, before you end, just like when I say like we shouldn't focus about helping, I meant more mostly like the performer in the playback theater, like when they're taking a story from audience. That's what I meant. Yeah, just to clarify this.
Right. So everyone, we've come to the end of our time, unfortunately, and it feels like, yeah, I mean, this is been such an incredible platform these last 3 weeks of this For Palestine Festival and this panel for all the work that still needs to be done and can be done. So I think, I hope that, those who have attended tonight and have attended the festival are inspired to continue creating the action that needs to be taken forward for justice in the world. And somebody asked a question, Adelaide, about have you thought of organizing this festival about the same theme in other countries? And I think that's, I'm not quite sure in terms of what you were thinking about that exactly, but, there are so many injustices happening in different parts of the world, and we can only, better ourselves as playbackers in the world if we know, what's happening in different parts of the world. So I think that's a fantastic idea. So I think, let's all go and do that work that needs to be done. So just a huge thank you to you, Faisal, Fidaa, Joe, and onwards and upwards to all of us.
And the translation also, thank you. You're doing great.
Thank you, translated. Yes.
I cannot imagine how we do that. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, so much.